Welcome back to Brush Up Your Game. Today, I have a pre recorded interview with Derek Barnett. We recorded this on Sunday morning, April 2nd. We just got together and chatted and had fun and talked about some of his design philosophy that goes into his custom packs. And really just, I enjoyed getting to know him to talk more. And you know what? I think the interview speaks for itself, so please give it a watch, give it a listen, and enjoy. Thank you again for your time. Appreciate it. All right, so hey, Derek, how did you get into the world of Star Trek Attack Wing?
By virtue of the awesome nature of the Decks.
Okay.
I saw the ships hanging on a rack at Eighth Dimension Comics and Games over in Houston,
Okay.
and I said, "Well, I don't know anything about this game, but I see people buying their X-wings and stuff all the time, and here is the coolest sci-fi ship ever made.
Hmm.
So I'm going to go buy that." So I bought the Hakona, and then immediately got approached by like the four guys in Houston that were actually playing, and they were like, "Hey, you play?" And I was like, "I sure could. What else do I need?" And
There
they
you go.
pointed me at the core set, and I showed up at an OP that next weekend with the Hakona and the Kazara, and immediately got stomped into the ground.
Romulans back in the day were tough, but
Yeah, this was like the Hakona was a brand new ship at that point. So
oh
what was that?
goodness, yeah.
That's been a while back.
Oh, so I'm assuming at that point you ran out and got like the Valdor and
Oh yeah, I just immediately started buying everything that I could for Romulans. I was still like locked into that. No, I'm gonna fly these Romulan ships. I love the look of them.
okay.
Uh, and then when I was like, you know what, I'd like to maybe win a match one of these days, I started flying Feds to go with them.
Oh, well, okay, so that's Nemesis thematicism. Get a little bit of that Fed and Romulan team up there. I like it.
Right? Yeah, I had to get something at some point because the only thing that seemed to be winning in our meta was flying scimitars. So you'd
Okay.
see, hey, here's a two scimitar fleet with a support ship, and you know exactly what it's going to do, but it's really hard to climb over those dice. So,
Yeah, yeah, Scimitar. We had
especially back in that day when it was like, there was nothing that was that powerful back then.
no. You had Borg, but they did not have the defense.
Yeah. And if
Yes.
you took the board, he'd just like snipe you from a distance, and then okay. I
Yeah.
mean, he can take down a cube pretty damn quick.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, the good old days, as it
Oh
were.
yeah, but it was fun because it was the challenge, right? Okay, how do I take out this monster? Which is like, again, not maybe the best Star Trek movie, but it felt like thematic. Like, how do I take out this absolute monstrosity?
Oh yeah, yeah. Nemesis has a sweet spot in my heart.
And then from that point, I was hooked. I went to every OP. We ended up, I think, up until the 2017 starter, I had like every ship except for the ATP, just
Okay.
because I started a little late for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a good time.
Grand prizes, not always the best ideas.
Yeah, I'm still a big fan of like because I don't want a game that's like Magic the Gathering where it's like everything is kind of beholden to this secondary market.
Okay.
And I'm like, that's not going to happen with a WizKids game. Like, look at the products y'all make, guys. Like,
Right.
so to me, I'm like, okay, maybe a year, 2 years after the OP, release it as a set, right?
Yeah.
Or even just the cards, because almost never were they like unique sculpts for the prizes. The ATP even wasn't. It was just a paint job.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I
So
think I remember talking about those, oh gosh, back in like the Warp Core Breach days of, give us like a 6 month set of OP ships or even like a 3 month set, to go with
yeah, or
whatever.
give them a unique paint job, give them something like that, so that
Yeah.
it's like, okay, you have the prize one. That feels special.
Yeah, sure. Not
But
that you can't repaint them and make them look similar, but still it's going to feel repainted.
right, yeah. I mean, I repaint pretty much all of mine, but it still turns into like, well, you can tell that was hand painted by somebody, not stamped out. Which sometimes looking at WizKid stuff was a better play anyway.
It
But
was, yeah. Uh, so Derek, what got you into creating custom cards to begin with?
so I've been doing, I guess, amateur hobby game design stuff since I was in high school.
Okay.
Like I do a bunch of like homebrew stuff for RPGs and whatnot.
Hmm.
I release stuff on DM's Guild, and this game, the more I was looking at it, I was like, man, I feel like we all just want a few things that they're not going to do. Like, and I finally got to the point where it's like, I really want to make uh, an Enterprise C because I feel like everyone started with, can we just have this ship already?
Yeah, I think
And so
that's
I was
kind of
like,
everyone's first entry into homebrew creation.
yeah, because, and especially then we got the OP for it. It was like the prize was not the ship.
Hmm.
And it was like, guys,
Yeah, you missed.
So, and I had used the Magic Set Editor tool for years beforehand, just
Okay.
for other card games. So I was like, you know what? I've tinkered around with it a little bit before, but I've never built a whole template from the ground up. I don't like using the Photoshop one because I don't have Photoshop because,
Hmm.
like I
Money.
worked at the time for an hourly wage. So,
Yeah.
so I started tinkering around with that. I built that MSE template and then I tried to build something with it and it was fine. It was adequate. Um, and then I was able to make a new ship and then I was like, ooh, this was fun. I get to tinker around with these mechanics and especially back then the field was still really wide open for stuff they hadn't played with yet.
Yeah.
You know, these days I feel like we're starting to butt up on the you need new mechanics to be able to make something that doesn't feel just like, oh, hey, that's a blue version of the other thing.
Right. Which says something about game design. I feel like the game design in Attack Wing has evolved, which
Oh
is
yeah,
it's
like
good to see.
the game is definitely better now than it was back then. Like they've, I think everyone agrees like the new stuff is stronger, but they've also just kind of started to fit in like, okay, these really need to be designed like this to
Hmm.
feel like you're flying a Fed ship. And so you're starting to feel that thematicism in the design and still having like mechanics that don't just go out of left field. Like, okay, I'm trying to think of a good example of one that really screwed with the meta. I mean, even things like interface, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like, that's really cool, but like it became a necessity for play.
Hmm.
So you got the theme and you missed the mechanical balance. And then it's like, okay, now we have to tilt everything against that.
Yeah. And then when they do a correction on it, then it feels closer, but you go, but now it doesn't feel as thematic.
Well, and it's always harder. Like you see this a ton when you do like homebrew in tabletop RPGs, where it's like if I give you something I've homebrewed and it's really cool, and I realize okay that was too strong, it feels really bad to pull it back.
Hmm.
Whereas if I say, hey, I'm going to give this to you, okay, I need to tune it up a little. Hey, it's a little stronger now, right? Like
Right.
I always try to err on the side of weaker. That way I can always amp it up. But if I have to backtrack it, then it's like, okay, I gave you this cool thing, but actually what I meant to give you was not so cool.
Yeah. And okay, to my credit, when I read your cards, there are a few moments where I start going, ooh, I like that. And of course, I'm coming at it from the realm of anything can mix anywhere, and I know you have different ideas, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But that's just where I'm thinking because that's how the game's been forever.
Right. And
And
that's I tried to keep that in mind. The thing I struggle with sometimes is points, which I
yeah,
guess I feel okay because WizKids it seems to as well.
yes,
Um, but it's one of those like there are some things that I'm like, okay, like would I pay 4 points for this?
hmm,
I mean, if that was all I had, I guess I might. Is that a reason to make it 4 points?
yeah, and
And then there are some of them where I just don't think about an interaction, and I was like, oh, okay, I definitely need to add a point or two to that.
and
Um,
I'm not always going to think about all those interactions, and that's where just putting it up there for public consumption is gonna hopefully get even more of those thoughts. And
Oh yeah, if we were ever to like build a Utopia style catalog of
mhm.
like custom cards, I would absolutely want to like, okay, all these ones have been released. Let's revise them before it rolls out.
Oh
Like
yeah,
I think of anything on the Facebook group as like a playtest
it is.
release. It's
It's
not like
all it's alpha testing.
right.
It's not
Because
even
I've like
beta.
I've designed these, I've thought through them, but it's not like I've taken them to table over and over and over again.
Yeah. Which I
So
mean, hey, with the content, the sheer numbers you're putting out, I will take. Hey,
yeah,
hey, I came up with this idea a week ago, and this is what I got, and this is
I
the
mean,
first
I
pass
wish I
at
was
it.
that creative with it. Like the MSC template that I use, because I've just gotten to where that's what I use.
Hmm.
For a really long time, I've been meaning to make updates to it, but I had a kid and changing jobs, and it just got hectic.
Sure.
And so I was making a whole bunch of stuff just in my spare time, but I'd throw it into like an Excel sheet or something, right?
Okay.
Like, okay, hey, this is kind of my idea. This I'll tweak this point cost later, and so there was a bunch of stuff that was like half designed.
Hmm.
And I finally got this window of time, and I updated the template, and then I was like, okay, now it's time to put all of this into art and just start churning it out.
Hmm.
So I've
Well,
still got like three or four more that are like in the queue of like half designed things. And then I've got the big one that I'd been wanting to do ever since Alliance came out, because I love the AI mechanics in that, right? Like
okay.
I want to
Yeah.
go screw around with that. So I've got one of those in my pocket that I've been tweaking and tweaking, and I just don't like it.
Okay. Okay.
So I need to keep screwing with it, but like that's a big one too.
Yeah. Well, as you've seen, I've been playing Alliance on the channel, and I want over the summer to go play some of the campaigns that I think it's Paul Mark. He put several fan campaigns together on Board Game Geek, and he's done like a pirates campaign where you're different independent ships.
Oh,
So
cool.
to me, that just sounds fun.
Oh yeah, and that's the thing about Alliance, and I feel like Alliance is the future of this game, right? Because
Yeah.
like any of the competitive releases, like okay, but they're not doing OPs, they're not doing
Hmm.
big tournaments. That's kind of like this vestigial thing that's added on there, and it's fun, and we want more content for
Of
that.
course.
But all of the new stuff that's really driving things forward, I'm like, okay, I can't wait to see after Dominion War, what's the next campaign y'all grab onto, right?
Yeah, and there's been talk about several different things, and I think all the talk from Tommy and Josh out of what's their story? Anyways, the guys that have designed it have said it all depends on how Alliance sells.
Oh yeah, which I mean, pre-orders in, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And the second they announced Romulans, I had to be
Oh, of
there.
course. And to their credit, they've said there's some really good stuff for Romulans coming.
Oh yeah, between that and Tal Shiar, I feel like I'm about to be living in a renaissance.
Yeah. Yeah. The oh, that cloaking device.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That got
But
me to play
again, like
Romulans.
mechanically designed, like this is now an auto include.
Uh-huh.
Like if I have the points for it, it's going on every ship I have that can echo.
Yes. And you need it.
Uh,
So,
Yeah,
okay, I said we were going to talk eras. So, we should probably talk eras. So,
yeah.
in your custom designs, you have how many eras is it now?
So I have it broken down into mostly by the series, but
Okay.
it's like so you have the Enterprise era, like
Yeah.
pre-Federation. You have the TOS animated series, early Discovery, Strange New Worlds, that kind of section.
Yeah.
I broke off the motion picture, like the TOS movies,
Okay.
because I figured like that was like an upgrade, right? That was that next half step up.
Yeah.
And then from there, I got into TNG, DS9 Voyager, and then now I've added in Picard, like the 25th century stuff, the generic future stuff, and then theoretically the 32nd century, 31st century, whatever it is for future
Whatever
discovery. But
Discovery timeline's in. Not that I'm not
yeah,
knocking Discovery's timeline. I'm just like, they haven't established enough time in that, at least not that I care about. It's just whatever future Discovery's in.
Oh yeah, and here's the thing. I think Discovery in the future is better than it ever has been.
Oh yeah.
Like that's the best Discovery's ever been on screen, and I would love to kind of play around with that, but I can't get my head out of this balance issue
Mm-hmm.
where it's like 1,000 years of development is too damn much.
Oh,
Right?
it
I
is.
cannot put the NX Enterprise next to the programmable matter super future ships.
No.
Um, so that's when I was like, okay, I want to put some indicator on these that these are intended to be kind of balanced against ships from the same era. And
Mm-hmm.
I have my own like house rule stuff where it's like, okay, if you want to play era specific stuff, you can pull older ships and technology, but you can't pull crew from a different era. You can't pull captains. Like you're playing TNG, you're going to run TNG era stuff,
That
and
makes
maybe
sense.
older technology if you wanted to for some reason. But assume it's not balanced to what you're facing over here, right? The Saber
Right,
class
right.
is going to destroy the Constitution.
That that's a good thought. I remember so many years ago. I'm thinking probably like 2017. I started on a Titan design pack because I
For
was
the oh well, many years ago it was the Luna Titan,
the
right?
Luna Titan, yeah,
Yeah.
because it was I was reading the books. I was reading all the books with Riker and his adventures on Titan and Dax on the Aventine and all of that. I don't know if you've read any of those books,
Oh
but
yeah, the Titan books are
oh,
fantastic.
they are. Please, and if you haven't read them, read them. Start with the Destiny series. That is a fantastic trilogy of books. But it just got me thinking. Okay, how can I go and just build some ships? And I got into like the Typhon Pact series of it's basically the Anti Federation.
Oh yeah, I haven't even read those ones,
Oh,
but yeah,
it's
it's
like
like
okay, so what would happen if the
the
Breen, the
I guess
Gorn, the Romulans, uh, the
it's like the Star
Kinshea.
Trek Legion of Doom, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's five alpha beta quadrant powers ally together.
Man, yeah, and well,
So
and I mean that's like the next logical step, right? Like you've
right.
gotten outside forces with like the Dominion and whatnot.
Hmm.
Like the idea that okay, you're just too big and influential. Like it's time to unite with our enemies against you. Like
Well, and it's when the Federation were bringing in even more people. They had a non-aggression pact with Cardassia. They've got the Klingons as a super ally. They've got the Ferengi are on their side now. It's like okay.
yeah, and it gets to that point where they just keep growing and growing, and like at
Hmm.
some point you're like, man, maybe the Romulans were right way back in like the Romulan War era, where it's like these guys are going to be too big of a threat.
Well, and it's almost to parallel to our own Earth history. It's like the British Empire of the 1800s, and you start
Yeah,
going or 18 and
hopefully slightly less evil, but yeah,
slightly less evil, but you start going, wait a
they're
second, this is
spreading and
maybe too
spreading and
big.
growing and growing.
Yeah, it just they saw something, they wanted it as part of them, and
Yeah, and then they get it. That's the problem.
right, and it's
Is
not
like
necessarily.
eventually it's the Federation just tortoising the hairs its way through it. It's like we're just still here.
But all that to say, I had these ideas, and I one of the things I did in building those ideas was have era logos for cards, or at least in my spreadsheet, I had eras on all the cards because there were era jumps in several of the books. And I said, okay,
Hmm.
when we're talking about something that happened 300 years ago, that needs to be a very different card than what's happening in our like Enterprise E Titan timeline. And
Yeah,
just
and I think it also helps with like mechanical design too,
it does. And
because you think about things like, okay, this wasn't developed yet,
mhm.
and I've associated this mechanic with that technology, so that mechanic shouldn't be in older cards. Or if it is, it should be there for like a very intentional reason, like this is a prototype kind of thing, right?
Okay.
So you think about like going back to Enterprise. I know a lot of people don't love that series, but a lot of things that they did right in the storytelling were like, hey, they have photon torpedoes. These folks have these like prototypes, these predecessors to that,
Yeah.
and they're not as strong and they're not as reliable, but
Hmm.
it's you can see the progression. Like, and I'm a big fan of. I think you saw I did the redesign for the refit NX ship
Yes.
because I was like, I really loved that redesign. I
Oh,
wished it
me do
had been
too.
on screen because it was like, oh, this makes logical sense, right? This was a prototype. It feels kind of like the Franklin and these,
Hmm.
you know, old ships. That was the kind of design they were leaning towards. And seeing that as like a bridge to the original Enterprise is like, okay, they're starting to experiment with the things and you can see that lineage, right?
Hmm.
Because that's as much as I enjoy the Excelsior, it always threw me off that the Excelsior just didn't match anything else, right?
Right.
In my head it was like you'd have the NX, okay, I can kind of see they don't have the shape yet, but they're heading in the saucer and tail direction. Then you get the original, and you get the Enterprise D, where it's like, okay, and if you look at the Enterprise C, like that transition, and you look at the Excelsior, and it's like this doesn't fit.
No.
So I in my head canon, I guess it was, there was always like this, okay, the original, the ambassadors, the galaxies, that was kind of like one lineage, and the Excelsior influenced more of like the sovereigns and the later TNG movies and stuff, where you started getting a lot more elongated, streamlined ships. And so you had these kind of like two competing philosophies of design, right? Like
Yeah.
bigger, tankier ships and thinner, faster ships.
And I think maybe part of that is the Excelsior doesn't have that vulnerable neck.
Right. It's very instead of feeling like two pieces of a big ship that have just been attached to each other, it's one continuous ship and it's long.
Yeah.
And that's the same feel you get looking at like the Sovereign class, where it's a long ship, but it doesn't feel as big as the Enterprise D. I mean, what did they call it in the most recent Picard season? The fat one.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But yeah, that's the big bulk, city in space ship.
Yeah. Well, it's what it was. It's a floating city,
Yeah.
practically. A
I mean,
very
well,
small
it
city.
what is it? It's like the Galaxy class is supposed to be more than half the full width of DS9's diameter.
Ooh.
It's
Yeah.
600 something meters long, and DS9 is a kilometer across.
That sounds
And it's
right.
like,
That
well, it's
it's
crazy because like I was messing around with ship scale stuff, and like the Jim Hadar, the big one,
okay.
is
Yeah.
I forget if it's the cruiser or the battleship, but the really big one, it's like half again as long as DS9 is wide.
Yeah.
Like that ship is like 1500 meters or something. DS9 is 1,000. And it's like, why do you have a battleship that's bigger than the space station? Like,
To win all things.
yeah, I mean, and it makes sense that it can't dodge. Like, no,
No.
like you talk about a city in space. This is getting to be like a state in space.
Oh, but it's okay because an attack wing that ship fits on the same base as a Romulan
Oh,
science vessel. Sorry,
oh man, don't.
I nitpick like three ships. Uh, the Jem'Hadar massive ship should be on a two by two,
Yeah,
and then I think the Scimitar should have been on a two by two.
yeah, and I mean, even the Daenerys was 1,300 meters
Yeah,
across, something
I
like
think
that.
what they should have done was create the standard one by one, and then they should have made not just the two by two, but they should have done a one and a half. So they should have
Yeah,
had like
well,
a
I mean,
medium base.
right before they changed X-wing over, they released like a half step
Uh
base,
huh.
and as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, that's what we needed.
Yep. And
Because
they
you were
needed
like, this
that
ship
for
isn't as big as a board cube that's supposed to be like 3 kilometers across,
yeah.
but we mechanically run into that space of like, okay, this can't, not everything can be the table destroying giant board cube.
Hmm. So that way you could
Um,
have like Dideradix could go on that, and I even like the medium Jem'Hadar ship could go on that.
yeah, because
Uh,
and that's the thing, right? Is you put the Defiant next to the Jim Hadar giant battleship,
Should be
and
like a
they're the
pinhead.
same mechanical size.
But so I understand, right? Like in the whole scale debate, I've always understood what people have said. This game
Yeah,
has no scale. You're playing a simulation.
yeah.
Some
And
different
even
base sizes
if
would help.
you, let's say we scaled all the ships perfectly, which means the Defiant looks like a grain of rice,
Uh huh.
and you still have to move them using the same movement templates. So the Defiant is hauling ass anytime it does a one straight,
Right.
and the Jem'Hadar ship is slightly moving forward.
Plus, you have to be able to target a ship, have a targeting arc, have a base that
Yeah.
can be hit.
So like there's always going to be some concession there. I wish we had more variety again, just for the mechanical complexity. Like let us have more toys in the toolbox to play with.
Yeah,
But at the same time, like there's always going to be a disconnect. You can't
there
have
is.
it be one to one ever. I mean, you'd literally not be able to see fighters, right?
Yeah,
The Peregrines,
yeah. You
they'd
wouldn't.
just be invisible on the screen.
It's a game,
Yeah,
and but I understand people wanting to see stuff on their table in a certain way.
yeah.
But
And
yeah,
I think there's room for it to, like you say, like have the different bases and play with them a little more, so we don't just have what is it like two, three large ships total in the game.
yeah. What is it? It's
You got the Zindi weapon, you got the Borg cube.
yeah, the tactical cube. Um,
Do we have any other large ships in the game right now?
I don't think so.
Yeah,
I
and
think that's it.
that's where it's like, that's I get like there's some kind of expense, difficulties for whiz kids. Like, do I want to produce more big ships that cost more
Yeah,
and won't sell as well, kind of thing? But it does kind of come into that, like, man, I wish we had more toys to play with, you know?
hmm yeah, absolutely. Because they're fun to put on the table,
Oh yeah,
right? If
the tech
nothing
cubes suck.
else,
You get destroyed every time you fly them, but you're fun to fly,
yeah. It,
especially if you use the pre-errata Borg movement.
well, and they fly so differently. They mess up plans. They take up more table space. They cause bumps. They cause different aspects you have to consider when you're flying, and anything that shakes the game up that way helps.
Oh yeah, because I mean, at this point, if you've been flying a lot, you know exactly where your ships are going to land, and
Pretty
the
much.
same reason that we're all excited to see the Bank Echoes,
Yes.
because it's going to screw with placement in a way that nothing has in a long time at this point.
Since the change on Borg move, really
Yeah,
was that's the last thing that really shook up how placement was going to change the way everybody flew.
yeah. If we see more things akin to that in the future, I see maneuvering really coming back into like the way that people play this game. Which I mean, that's the funnest part of flying these, right? Is moving
Mm-hmm.
them around the board.
Yeah, I'd love to
So
see some kind of like a universal upgrade for whole two or less ships that lets them do one turns.
yeah, yeah. Give and one of the upgrades that I really liked, but I didn't like how it was mechanically released. They had the full stop.
Mm-hmm.
I used to fly this thing all the time, and it's 5 points for a one-time stop.
That's
But
not.
you can really screw with people if you just suddenly like parking brake into the space,
Oh yeah, it full.
And
And I remember. Okay, so very early on, Andrew Parks, original designer of Attack Wing, was very active in the Board Game Geek forums, and he spoke about ships needing to move, and there were two aspects to that. One was inertia in space. It's very difficult to put on all stop. And we see it even
yeah,
in the show where Captain orders all stop, Helm responds with all stop, and the ship still coasts for a little bit.
yeah, because you essentially have to like reverse all your thrust.
Yeah. Uh,
So you're not really stopping; you're moving backwards at the same speed you're moving forward,
yeah.
which is not easy, especially when you have gigantic ships with a lot of momentum behind them. But
And you're in the middle of a battle, so it's even tougher to do that. The second, so that's the thematicism of it. The second was the
right,
gameplay aspect was, hey, we do want maneuvers to kind of be predictable. We also want ships to fly at each other. And they
Yeah,
did want a very different game than X-Wing, where X-Wing typically games went to time and you saw ships left on the board at the end. They wanted Attack Wing to have death and destruction.
yeah. Which I mean, it makes sense, right? Because these, you know, comparing the two games, like Attack Wing throws more dice and defends less.
Yes.
So you kill more things. And then there's so many more shenanigans combos, which again, thematic to Star Trek,
Uh
right?
huh.
It's the crew has cobbled together out of a piece that we took off of Data's ear and some bubble gum, and now we have a device that can blow up a sun. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. Really. Right. It's
so yeah,
crazy.
I mean, I do like it, and I like that it doesn't feel like dogfighting in the way that X-Wing does.
Mm-hmm.
I almost want to lean more into that. Like I've always kind of played around with mechanics that feel more like capital ship or even like submarine combat kind of stuff.
Okay.
Because that's like the best OP I ever played was Balance of Terror. And I
Yes.
say that was when I solidified like, okay, I want to play era games because we limited that to Enterprise and TOS era stuff.
Okay. That's a good way to do
So
it.
I flew freaking Vulcans back then because it
Ooh.
was like the only time you could fly Vulcans and not have them blown out of the sky.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was so fun to be like, okay, like this suddenly turned into a game of like dancing around each other and finding your opening and then launching your huge attack of 3 dice. And it
Yes.
felt so much more in that positioning and like strategic thought, like, okay, after this move, I'm going to do this, this, and this.
Mm-hmm.
Which again, that's the same way I feel about like playing Alliance, right?
Right.
Suddenly, because you are able to kind of meta game into that AI card, like, okay, they're going to do some kind of bank towards me, probably. Like percentage wise, it's likely. Maybe they'll fly off the board. I don't know. But they probably are going to bank towards me. And if they do, I need to move here because next turn I'm going to have to move here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that kind of strategic thought, and again, works really well in the cooperative style of Alliance and whatnot.
It
But like,
does.
that's I think why Alliance feels so good to play,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because suddenly you feel like you're playing that role of the captain on the ship, trying to think 2, 3 moves ahead, not just jousting, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think that Alliance is making better pilots out of all of us because
Absolutely.
it's we're having to predict what our enemy ship's going to do. We're having to be very careful with the way that we build fleets for specific missions, how to
Oh yeah,
combat what enemies are going to do.
having goals outside of blow up every enemy ship,
Yeah.
like those. I mean, we had talked before online about scan, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
how like scan in the base game is fine and has some uses, but scan in Alliance, man, sometimes you're like, okay, I need an upgrade specifically just so I can let this ship scan
Yes.
because I need it. Like if
Mm-hmm.
I can't scan, I can't win this objective.
Right. There's the I think it's mission 3. You have to scan to take the survivors off of the planet.
Right. So then it turns into, well, you're not going to take a Burrell to that fight,
No.
or if you are, you're going to have to plan around that.
Mm-hmm. Or at least have one ship who can scan, and then you're going to be there a whole lot longer.
Yeah, because yeah, then you got to sit there and say, okay, I'm defending you, and I think that's how a lot of people played the base one, right? Like Excelsior's, go do the work. Akira's, go attack.
Right. Which works until it doesn't, because the
Yeah,
Akiras can only survive for so long.
yeah, and that's exactly it. I don't want to go again, for lack of a better phrase, jousting with those bugs
Mm-mm.
because especially those elites, I don't care how big my ship is, I'm gonna go down.
Yeah. And Alliance has I think has shown us all death by 1,000 cuts is still a viable strategy in this game.
Oh yeah, I haven't gotten to play. I just got my set 2 what like a week ago or so, and I haven't got to play with it yet.
Yeah.
But I'm so nervous about what those Galors are going to do to me.
They target lock for free every round before they move. Then they move and then they do something.
Yeah, and admittedly, you have stuff like that, and I'm sitting there going, okay, what upgrade is that going to be the next time I design a Cardassian card, right? Because like I want that mechanic over here
Oh,
somewhere.
absolutely. I mean, that can be a captain, that can be a named ship ability, that can be a built in tech or just a tech card. Um, yeah, speaking to your eras, and this is just a good, well, maybe a good thought I had. Uh, when you have a technology in, say, a TOS era, you can have it built as a disable tech. Then you fast forward to like the TNG days, then you can make it the time token tech.
Right. And then, or if you have something that, okay, you had to like pay a big cost, right? You had to discard
Mm-hmm.
something or take damage or something like that. In the future, it can be an aux.
Mm-hmm.
Because, yeah, we don't do it. Well, what was again, referencing? I just watched a bunch of Star Trek Picard. Um, but what was the line where she's like, oh, we don't have to do that on the newer models, Captain Admiral?
Oh yeah, okay. At the
And
start
it's
of
like, oh, yes, very good there, Commander.
tell engineering to prepare for warp.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like, oh,
We don't have
buddy,
to do that anymore.
we love you so much. You're very old. You've
Yeah,
been retired.
yeah. And, I mean, to be fair, it's that's how things were back on the Galaxy class. You needed to tell engineering.
Well, and to get super nerdy with it, I love that parallel. You compare that to the episode in TNG when Scotty showed up,
Uh huh.
and he's like shouting at Geordi, like, "Your dilithium's gonna explode!" And Geordi's like, "That's not a thing for like 50 years." But it's that same like there comes a point where it's like, okay, you haven't been here, you haven't been up to date with everything,
Mm-hmm.
and that technology has changed. And reflecting that in the design, yeah, I think that's fantastic.
It
And
is.
I think the only thing we really get that with in the base game is the torpedoes. They get
Yes.
stronger and faster with each like progressive generation of
Right.
ships.
And I do so I just saw your I think it was the torpedoes, the Fed torpedoes that mimic Ferengi torpedoes. Maybe that was yours, maybe that was somebody else's. But they made it a disable, but it puts the aux on the ship that gets targeted.
Yeah, that was I think that was on the Excelsior, the new one.
Yeah, but I like
Because they had
that.
the speedy torpedo thing. So I was like, they're disabled torpedoes, but then you have this other upgrade that you can turn them into time token
Yeah.
torpedoes if you have the tech with it.
So it was this cool parallel for me to see. Okay, hey, we have these speedy torpedoes if you want them, but they're not going to do this cool new thing
Right,
because it's like we've reversed engineered Ferengi torpedoes, but it comes at a cost.
right, and that's especially when you're designing Fed stuff. Like you want to have them do shenanigans.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you build Klingons, they shoot and they
Yes.
shoot hard and they shoot fast, and then they'd like to shoot again, please. They are to parallel to like designing D&D stuff, right? Like they are the barbarian.
Uh huh.
They would like to rage, and that's what they want to do. And then you have the feds that are like the wizard, right? Okay, I need this tech and these two crew, and they're gonna key off of this captain's ability to make this weapon do this,
Yep.
and then I'm gonna take a speed 2 maneuver afterwards, right?
Right.
And
Right.
that again plays into that thematic design, right? Like you could mix these things together. You can pay and have the big heavy Klingon torpedoes on your Fed ship, but you can also have the Fed stuff where all of these pieces work together in concert and you have this technique going on. And then the Klingon says, "Okay, I'm going to bring a ganker and shoot your captain."
Right. And it. Yeah. It's there. There's. I used to live under the school of let's mix it all, please. And I think in my older age, I am starting to lean more towards. You know what? I'm perfectly happy running a fleet that has a Klingon ship, a Romulan ship, and a Fed ship. but let's let each ship do its own thing. There's enough variety in each faction. Each faction tends to be fairly fleshed out, except Kazon. Kazon needs some love, please. That those ships can do their own thing and be very successful at it. And at some point, restrictions breed creativity, and I have too many choices if I'm trying to mix everything.
Right. Well, and I think from a design perspective, there's two kind of uh, ways you can go about this, right? I don't know if you've ever played Star Wars Armada.
No, I haven't.
Um, so it's very faction locked. You
Mm-hmm.
pick your faction, and you're running Imperials or you're
Yes. Yeah.
running Rebels, and they have their own unique playstyles and ships, and everything about them is self-contained, and you don't have the opportunity to cross over. And I think that's one design philosophy, right? But I think the other side of that, and the side that I think Attack Wing is really starting to get good at, is you can cross faction all you want, but you're going to want to less and less the more you see the way that your mechanics work together.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I run just Romulans, they're going to work nicely with Romulans. And I can design them in a way that encourages you to keep that.
Yeah.
You could go get what was the idea of okay, I'm going to run a Vorcha or something, and I'm going to put the Romulan cloaking device and the Klingon cloaking device on there together. You can do that, but do you really want to? Like, yeah, it gets that Vorcha a neat bank, but like at the cost, and it doesn't really give you as much benefit as it would running more Klingon stuff on that ship.
You're right. Yeah. Because
And I
then
think that
that's your other
design is
tech
what we're
slot.
getting really good at, right?
Yeah. It's an opportunity cost too. And I think that's what well, I brought that up a lot in looking at your cards. It's we got to consider it's not just the card and the cost, it's the opportunity cost of okay, this is eating a slot and it's using this instead of all other things. You got to make those tough choices.
Yeah, and I mean, because of the way that they've evolved attack wing design at WizKids, you always because we didn't throw out old cards,
No.
right? So you have to look at the entire back catalog of the game, and there are some cards out there that it's always a thought in your head is should I bring this? I mean, the old interface generators was a perfect example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that you always had to think, is that worth it? And the design trick is to start saying maybe instead of yes,
Right.
because it goes from auto include to, well, but I could do this and this and this.
Mm-hmm.
And like, then you get to the point where it's like, I don't want to even think about cross factioning because that costs me at least one extra point. And I remember the golden days of officer exchange program.
Oh yeah.
Um, but yeah, that was and you know what? That's something else I wish WizKids would bring back for us is resources. Like I wish they'd release a resource bundle pack and just be like, hey, every OP resource that ever existed are now here. Here's the optional rules to add them to the game. Like go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think especially for people who've gotten into the game after the OPs were kind of winding down or gone, like those are the kinds of things that would in the same way we talked about at the beginning with the OP prizes coming back into the game, and we have like the assimilation target prime in the faction pack, right?
Right.
So those are the kinds of things where it's like, okay, we're giving you the old toys to play with.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some classic cards that should come back. Whether they release that whole pack or they just say, hey, we're pulling in some of these old cards that you're probably not going to get.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it would be great to see a flagship for every faction
oh yeah,
as just a hey, you could do this. I mean, flagships were some of the most imbalanced things in the game, but they were also some of the most fun things you could run in the game.
oh yeah, and it again to that like it was always worth 10 points to bring it,
Mm-hmm.
but
Now,
at
to
the
be
same
fair, I would
time,
like to see them as faction locked items. No, and then the independent ones are only for independent ships.
oh yeah. Well, and I'm a like God, what was the name of the card? Captured.
Yeah.
The independent one that could just let you steal any ship.
Yeah.
And I loved that design space because again, independents need something.
They do.
They're always the faction of afterthoughts.
They are.
You know, you bring up the Kazon, which I'm really happy we have sub factions now. Kazon makes so much more sense in the same
Yeah.
space as Hirogen and Vidians and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
It almost it's not quite just calling them the Voyager era faction,
Right.
um, but you know, putting those together with your cons and your Ferengi and whatnot, suddenly you start to have kind of a viable faction of misfits.
Mm-hmm.
And letting them play a little bit with everyone else's mechanical toys. I think that's how you make them start to feel maybe not cohesive, but like functional,
A little
right?
bit more fun.
Is yeah, I can't do the best of anything, but I can do a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
And you know that's a fun space to play in. It's the same space that Mirror wants to play in, which is
Yes.
unfortunate because I know you've seen this in my cards. Like I don't like making Mirror faction stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I like making Fed stuff that is Mirror unique
Sure.
or something like that because if it's from the Federation and like I started running with the alternate timeline unique stuff
Mm-hmm.
because it's like, well, the Pasteur was never a mirror universe ship, and they wouldn't have a medical ship in the Terran Empire.
No.
And
No,
I
and
want the
I
Terrans
mirror
to
should have
play
been
like
broken.
scary Klingons, right?
Yeah.
They come in hard and fast, but they also have shenanigans.
Yeah.
Like,
Mirror Universe needed to be an alt timeline faction and then a true mirror universe. Mirror and myriad universes faction.
yeah.
But
And there was again, they kind of just threw them in there, I think, to be something else, but they wanted it for every time Star Trek did something weird.
yeah.
They're mirror.
Yeah.
And so we end up with like ships that are like, yeah, that makes perfect sense, and other ships that are like, sure, this is here too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Which
it
okay,
made for an
fine.
odd faction design wise,
It
but
it it is, and it still needs more help
yeah, I mean the Kelvin pack I think is pretty much their whole faction at this
at
point.
this point. Yes. All right. Well, Derek, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. Is any last parting words you wanna share?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for chatting with me. Thanks for reviewing all my cards and stuff.
Oh,
And
of course.
I've seen a few others. You know, I just saw the shuttles and runabouts thing that got released.
Yeah.
That's really neat. I saw Dan did the La Serena, so like we've
Uh
got
huh.
a good chunk of custom cards starting to roll out, and I love to see what everybody's working on. So I
Yeah.
know I'm kind of flooding the market right now,
No,
but
it's
like I want to
good.
see everybody put these out. It's a great time to be making cards.
It is. I may have to toy around and see if I can get Titan, my Titan and Typhon pack uh, back up and dig that out of the grave. We'll
Yeah.
see.
Hey man, if you want to work on it, I'd work with you. I'm happy to. I love seeing new stuff hit the tables.
Yeah.
So
Well, I always said I'm the chicken who is happy to review everybody else's, but I haven't put my neck on the line with my own
hey,
creations. So
you
I mean,
know,
hey, no time like the present to get to change that out.
and that's the best thing about this community,
Oh
man,
yeah.
is when you put stuff out for some other games, you always have to be nervous about what you're going to get. Man, when you put stuff out for this community, it's just people cheering more, more, more.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So
Which
it's a great group to release things to. I'll tell you.
well, good. I'm glad you feel that way as a creator. That only makes me feel good, and I'm glad I can be a part of that and be what I hope is a cheerleader and an encourager. I know sometimes I start going, I'm not sure that works so good, or I'm confused, but hopefully that always is. Hey, I'm not sure and I'm confused.
Oh yeah, dude, that's what we need to hear, right? Like if something doesn't click, talk about it, right?
Yeah.
Like I think on the Excelsior one that you just did, uh, I realized I left off a key phrase to one of the
Oh,
cards,
okay. Yeah.
and it totally screwed up the mechanics of it. So I'm like, okay, gonna revise that one real quick.
Yeah. Well, and that's
Um,
okay, right? That, like we said in the beginning, this is all
yeah, this is a
alpha
beta release.
testing,
This
and
is
yep. So
out to the community for feedback. But yeah, no, no, it's a great time to do it, and I appreciate everybody who's making stuff. I appreciate folks like you who are commenting and reviewing stuff. Like
yeah.
it's a great group.
All
So
right. Well, hey, Derek, again, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. It was truly a pleasure.
yeah, yeah. Hope we'll chat again sometime.
Absolutely.